Hi everyone, Talia from Zart Art. Today we're going to be making a glazed tile using a Sgraffito technique. A Sgraffito technique is like a scratchback. So today we're going to be using underglazes. We've got 3 different colours of underglaze here to create the surface to Sgraffito into. So what we're going to do is start off with our yellow underglaze. Now if your underglazes have been sitting around for a little while, then you'll notice they may have separated. So it's always a good idea to give them a bit of a stir before you paint anything on. So this one is quite nice and thick, so there's not too much separation there. So once you've got your glazes stirred, we can apply them straight on the tile. Now this tile is a pre-bisque fired tile. So what that means is it has been fired in the kiln once, just to dry out the clay. So you can pre-buy these tiles, or you can make your own if you've got enough time to cut all your tiles out and to fire them as well. But using ones that are already pre-made means you can cut back a lot of your time. When you are applying your underglaze, you just want to make sure it's a nice even coat, and because we're doing a few different layers, you need to make sure that it's not too thick, because that can affect how the glaze will fire. If you do put on too many coats of glaze, then what can happen is that it will crack when you do your glaze fire. So now that we've got our first coat of yellow on, we can start with our next colour. What you might notice with this technique is I'm going from lightest colour to darkest colour. So our next colour will be an orange. And you might also notice that our bisque fired tile is drying quite quickly. So you don't need to have any wait time in between the layers, because the yellow that I've already applied is dry. So we can put the orange straight over the top. And remember to always stir your glazes before you use them. So you can see that was separated a little bit. And as I stir, it'll all come together. Make a nice even layer. So again, the same process, a nice thin layer of the orange over the yellow. Okay, so now our orange is done. Just wash the brush in between each layer just to make sure the colour doesn't run through to the other glazes. And our last colour will be black, so this will make a really nice contrast between the different tones, which you'll be able to see once the work is finished and glazed. So just wipe off the excess orange glaze. And then our last layer of black will go straight over the top. And again, you can probably see how quickly that the glazes underneath are drying, and that's because of the pre-bisque fired tile absorbs all the moisture. So you can just keep going straight over the top. And again, make sure that when you are using multiple layers of underglaze that you don't do too many or too thick. About 4 layers, 3 or 4 layers is quite good. Otherwise you might have some problems when you're firing if it is too thick, with cracking and other things like that. Okay, so now that we've got all of our layers of underglaze on, I'm just going to let that sit for a little bit, maybe a minute or so, just so the black can dry over the top, and then we'll start scratching back into the tile. Now that we've got our tile dry, we'll be using these tools to scratch into. So these are clay cleanup tools, but they all have different points and different edges. I prefer to use this one because it's got a bit of a sharp point on one end and it's a bit thicker on the other side as well. So depending on how fine your lines are, you can scratch more detail into it, or you can carve out some thicker areas. So for the design, we're just going to do something nice and simple and use a tree, as well as scratching in some more details in the background to create that contrast. What I usually do is start off with a very fine line just to get a bit of a guide where you're going to place everything. Knowing me, I always change my mind or stuff up where things are. So playing it safe and just doing a very, very thin line just so you can work around it later if you do change your mind or want to place things somewhere else. And By doing that, you can always paint some more black underglaze over the top if you want to cover up those little scratches that you make. So I'm just going to use this as a bit of a guide of where I'm going to scratch out the rest of the detail once I'm happy with the placement. Now that I've got a rough outline of where I'm going to place the tree, I'm going to start carving out some deeper lines, but not going too deep so that you're not just carving out the black and then seeing the underneath of the white, and trying to vary how much pressure you put into it so you get those different variations of colours and tones. So for example, if you do it quite lightly, you'll see the orange coming out underneath, and then the more you press into one area, you'll see the yellow come out underneath that, and the final layer of colour will be the white, which we don't want to scratch too far into, but we'll try and get those nice colour variations through the clay. So don't put too much pressure into it, just nice and lightly, and the clay is still quite nice and wet to carve into, so you're not getting too much powder coming out of that. So now I'll just continue to go around the image. Now we've got the rough outline of the tree. The next part we're going to do is the background. So I'm going to use a lot of small scratches to create a textured background, so it'll have a nice contrast with the tree, which is majority black and doesn't have a whole lot of texture into it. So now I'm just going to start by scratching in some nice close together lines and going different directions, so we get some nice patterns and some different shapes happening. So I'm going to do this for the whole background layer, and then we can have a look at that once it's done. Now that we've got our design scratched into the tile, you'll notice that the colours of the underglaze are a bit subtle, but once we've put our gloss over the top and it does fire, it'll be nice and vibrant. So just remember, when you are buying glaze colours, they will be a lot different once they are fired. So now I've got my clear gloss. We'll get a clean paintbrush. I'll just wash this one off. And what we'll do is put the clear gloss over the top of our tile. What you could do is glaze it as is, but you won't get the same shininess that you'll get by using the gloss over the top. And again, I'm just going to stir it to make sure that it's not settled to the bottom. And this one's nice and thick. So we'll put a nice coat over the top, and that will turn the image quite white and opaque once it dries, but when you fire it, this will create the nice shiny effect that you get with ceramics. So the clear gloss will need about 2 coats, so 2 nice thick coats over the top, and again, it's best not to overdo it, otherwise you can cause cracking once you've fired it in the kiln. So just make sure I get a nice even coat. And you'll notice that it's starting to go white and opaque over the top, which is fine, because once we fire it, it'll come out colourful. So just put that second coat over the top. You might want to wait a little while for it to dry between coats, but ain't nobody got time for that. And done. Okay. Now we've got our tile all glazed and glossed, and we'll put it in the kiln for a glaze fire. So that's always different depending on what kind of kiln you have. So the next time you see this tile, it'll have some nice vibrant colours and you'll see the design that we've scratched into it. All right, now we've taken our tile out of the kiln, so it's been fired at about 1100 degrees for this particular glaze. Other glazes may vary on firing temperature, but as you can see, all the details in our little tile carving have come out. You can see some of the oranges and the yellows coming from underneath the black glaze, which we put over the top. And we've got some nice pattern textures in the background, and it's good when you're working with something like this to have a nice full image in the foreground, so something with thick lines and a lot of black, so that all the image doesn't get lost in the background and all the layers of texture which you're putting in behind that image that will be in the foreground. Now, something like this can be done with a variety of different grade levels depending on how able your kids are in terms of their drawing ability, because when it comes down to it, this is kind of like drawing but with clay tools. So I would say anything from grade 3 upwards, even secondary schools can do quite nice intricate designs as well. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you again next week. All right, now we've got our kiln out of what?
You took our kiln out of the tile already?
Already.